In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Take control of your destiny. Understand your past. Put your present in context and know your future with a twist. Check out the designs and watch the videos about Abracast Tarot Card Deck on Advertise.com. When you order a deck, get a free exclusive bonus tarot card. Also, sign into the mailing list to get a free ebook about the Abracast Tarot Card Deck and other bonus content. Visit the storefront on Abracast.com. The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
All right, hey, welcome. This is, you know who this is. It's John, and this is the Abracast. This is a Fellowcraft episode. So I'm using this opportunity to do another episode of the many lessons from Thus Spake Zarathustra. This would be part 2. So, Wednesdays we're doing live reading nights on the main channel. So doing a couple of those, and then when I have enough to do a Fellowcraft episode on them, this is just kind of like what I've learned, my takeaways from all this Zarathustra stuff. So if you're one of the live listeners and you're like, what does that mean? Or how do we become the Overman? Tune in here, my friends. And this is where we kind of discuss maybe that aspect of it. So not a whole lot of bullshit to put in the front of this thing. Let me lube up and we can take off here. When I'm doing Crowley episodes, I'm always like, I'm sick of my hair. Like, I'm just going to shave all my hair off. I'm going to go do a Crowley. And then when I'm all into knee deep into all this Nietzsche business, I'm like, you know what? Fuck this beard. I'm just going to shave a big walrus mustache. Maybe I should not throw the baby out with the bathwater and do both. Oh, boy. So that stray thought was brought to you by my vessel of the art and my gin and tonic. The many lessons from the spoke Zarathustra. Actually, that's not what it's called at all. It's called The Many Lessons of Zarathustra Part 2. So obviously the feature topic or the feature reading, the feature book, god damn it, is Thus Spake Zarathustra. And then we have a featured website, Sparknotes, this essay, Existentialism of Thus Spake Zarathustra. And then I found like a straight up and down, like academic thing, like a resource for teachers. And I thought that their summaries were pretty good. It's called Grade Saver. You don't think to find nihilism in Grade Saver, but I did. So let's just jump into this thing. The first speech we're going to talk about is on enjoying suffering the passions. And, this is the one where we learn to grow most from our moments of suffering and intense feeling. They make us unique. And they should not be shared for fear of losing this uniqueness. Someone who is driven by more than one intense passion will suffer greater inner conflict. I think that we're going to touch on this again later on when we start talking about I think it's called 1,000 Goals. So this idea of moments of suffering and intense feeling. I think it's weird because I know the last time we did this, I tied a bunch of it into Gnosticism, which when people look at this stuff and they look at Gnosticism, I don't think they connect dots, but I think I do. This moments of intense feeling or suffering. That's some of the ways these ancient Gnostics found gnosis is like through, it's not recommended to do it from like intense pain. The way that I always thought about it was, a pain, like something that hurts so bad that it sort of pushes you out of your body and you can like look into yourself from the outside. Man. Existentialism of Thus Spake Zarathustra says, on enjoying the suffering and the passions, one should not have one's virtues in common. This is another thing that I've discovered while going through this is I keep drawing parallels to social justice warriorism or NPCism. And just think about that from this existential paper. One should not have one's virtues in common. I learned this in the corporate world, in a past life, dwelling in a cubicle somewhere. I never heard this term groupthink before. This was probably like 2002. We were probably on the cutting edge of this corporate bullshit talk. But, I was having an informal meeting with one of my bosses in her office, and we were kind of strategizing on how we were going to talk to an employee or something about something. And I was like, well, this is the way I think about it. And she goes, yes, I think we have groupthink. And that was like her way of saying, we think alike. And all this stuff with forced diversity and all this social justice warriorism is, I look at it in the same way. Like, you can have a room of, 6 black dudes, and, some people would point to that and they'd be like, look, it's diversity. And you're like, well, it is diversity. But, okay, so let's do it this way. Because no one would ever point to 6 black dudes and be like, that is not diverse. Especially social justice warrior types. Like, that is like, all right, so say there was like 6 white dudes in a room. And they're like, that is not diverse. But it is. Because those 6 white dudes do not have, like, they're the only identifying feature is not their skin. They are dragging with them their years of experience and all the shitty things that's ever happened to them and all the good things that's ever happened to them and all their accomplishments and all their failures, and all of these things form all of these things with their experience and their perspective has informed them. All of the decisions that they've made in their life inform them in their experience, right? So you can look at a group of 6 white dudes and, social justice warriors would be like, that is not diverse. What they mean is it's not racially diverse or whatever, but what the fuck? We're living in a world where Kamala Harris is identifying as African American. Her mom was an Indian and her dad is from Jamaica or something. And her great grandfather was a slave owner or something, but this is the crazy world we live in where the people's only identifying, the only factor that matters is the color of their skin. And I don't agree with it. And I think that this existentialism paper, the way that I'm reading it is it's pointing to that one should not have one's, virtues in this scenario that I'm talking about. The virtue would be the color of their skin, I suppose. or, their identity politic in common. The creator will create new values, but will not impose them upon others. And this is my good. This I love. It pleases me wholly, thus alone too I want the good. I do not want it to be as divine law, and I do not want it as a human statute and need. So the great saver, the kind of, like I said, straight up and down sort of analysis and summary is, although the title of the speech deals with passions and pleasures, the real subject of the speech is virtue. Zarathustra teaches us that virtue is a private matter that a person feels deep down in the self, and virtue arises from the passion, and it is kind of passion itself, but it is not a universal law, such as a law from a god or a truth that everyone can share. Virtue is a private feeling for the individual, and religion and morality view certain passions as wrong or evil. Yet Zarathustra tells his listeners that all the passions are permissible and can be turned into virtue. For Zarathustra, even passions like anger and hate have been transformed into virtues, so that a person who follows Zarathustra's teaching will no longer do evil. For Zarathustra, it is mankind's battle with virtues within that has caused all the evil in the world. And the old teacher from the first speech said that only sleep could overcome this battle, and Zarathustra has given another way for human beings to triumph in this battle, the overman. And when I read this summary, I think of Crowley. It's funny, I was talking about Crowley earlier. Crowley had called Nietzsche a prophet of Thelema. And when Crowley starts talking about responsibility and the silliness of morality, you can kind of totally see it in there. All right, scooching right along to the speech of the pale criminal. This section paints the portrait of a criminal who then confesses his guilt, and he secretly wanted to kill, but convinced himself that he wanted only to rob, and therefore committed a murder theft. Although he was perfectly capable of murder, he is repelled afterward by the thought of what he has done. His crime is not so much that he murdered, but that he was driven to it by his weakness and was subsequently racked by guilt. At the end of his crime, at least his crime makes him aware of his weakness, which is more than can be said for most. Here, this is this theme of introspection, and we've already stumbled onto. The existential paper says, on the pale criminal, in the eyes of the pale criminal, Zarathustra finds the great contempt. When one's contempt turns inward, and one has contempt for oneself, when one longs for the ego to be overcame. Great Saver says, This speech deals with the institutions of justice and self-governance. It's important. To show this, Zarathustra speaks of the pale criminal, a man who has committed an instance of robbery and murder. The judges of this man suppose that he is a robber who committed the murder, but Zarathustra has a different opinion. Zarathustra understands the motivations of the body and hypothesizes that this man is a murderer who committed robbery. He is a man whose soul wants blood, and the guilt he feels over the murder and his misunderstanding of the reason behind it make him pale. Zarathustra condemns the pale criminal because of his guilt, and he calls the criminal a heap of diseases. Zarathustra also condemns the judge because the judge believes himself too good to be too be good based on the old laws of religion and morality. Remember, this law of religion to Zarathustra is silly because, as Zarathustra has said, God is dead. Zarathustra says he prefers the heap of disease to the judge because at least the criminal has separated himself from the prevailing traditional teachings. On reading and writing, a great writer puts so much of himself into his work and writes at such an elevated level that most people cannot understand him. Although we might be inclined to think of such writers as serious, Zarathustra characterizes them as bearing a spirit of levity and laughter. He bemoans widespread literacy since it has encouraged writers to simplify or to dumb down, in our modern day parlance, their work for the masses. The existential paper says, on reading and writing, Zarathustra is perhaps this guy's pretty funny. He's pretty brilliant with his observation. Zarathustra is perhaps giving some hints about reading this text, a text written in the blood of aphorisms. What does it mean to write in blood? Perhaps that the writing of this philosopher may not at all impersonal. Anyways, there are some splendid aphorisms. True, we love life, but not because we are used to living, but because we are used to loving. There is always some madness in love, but there is always some reason in madness. Perhaps a hint concerning Nietzsche's critique of the Judeo-Christian concept of God. Too serious. Quote, I would believe only in a God who could dance. And when I saw my devil, I found him serious, thorough, profound, and solemn. It was the spirit of gravity. Through him all things fall. And unquote. And a hint about Nietzsche's critique in this book, quote, not by wrath does one kill, but by laughter, and come, let us kill the spirit of gravity, unquote. Is Nietzsche a joker and this book sort of a joke? Perhaps. Grade Saver says, on reading and writing. The speech on reading and writing is concerned with how people communicate and how people understand one another. The speech starts with an aphorism. Zarathustra loves only what is written in blood. Aphorisms, short sayings that reveal a higher truth. But are those to be valued because they elevate the listener to a higher level of meaning? The listener will then look down on all those who do not understand, and the ideas of ascending and descending once again come into play in this speech. If Thus Spoke Zarathustra had been written as an essay, most themes would be easier to comprehend. The idea of the overman, however, would be lost. The book is written as a series of aphorisms so that those who truly seek to know will ascend to a higher level. You must reach the higher level. Your mind, body, and spirit must become one. You are the last dragon. The rest of the speech is about how Zarathustra's own elevation allows him to dance above those as enlightened as he. He claims that only God could ever believe in is a God that could dance, and that the devil that he can believe in is a devil of gravity and seriousness, and only through laughter can such a devil be killed. And the speech ends with the image of Zarathustra flying high above the world in his enlightenment, letting him look down on the rest of the world. On the tree on the mountainside, Zarathustra speaks to a youth who feels isolated and frustrated in his struggle for independence. This is the self-governance theme that we've been picking up on. As he distances himself from others, he earns their contempt and often feels self-contempt as well. Zarathustra encourages the youth, urging him to never give up hope. The existential paper, On the Tree on the Mountainside, Zarathustra gives advice to the youth. The soul is like a tree. The higher it reaches towards the height with its branches, the deeper it must sink its roots into the earth. The soul is rooted in the body. You are the last dragon. On the tree on the mountain, this is a great saver. The speech takes on a form of conversation that Zarathustra has with one of his disciples. The young man has retreated from Zarathustra's teaching because it is an awakening feelings in him that he fears. And Zarathustra finds the young man on the mountain underneath the tree, and he tells him the parable of how the invisible wind is able to move the tree when human hands cannot. And the young man is startled and confused by Zarathustra, and he begins to confess that his teachings have awakened uncertainty and doubts within him. Zarathustra shows him how the tree, though it reaches for the heavens, also has roots that reach for the dark and evil places in the earth. And the young man agrees that this reflects his own situation. Zarathustra continues his parable by showing the young man that through the tree has grown tall, it waits for nothing but to be struck by a lightning. The young man's true feelings come out, and he envies Zarathustra, causing the dark feelings within him. And Zarathustra embraces the young man and begins to teach him how envy can be transformed and overcome. This speech, returning to a narrative form, shows the impact that Zarathustra's lessons are having on his pupils. The young man, obviously talented, has been consumed by envy because he sees an enlightened being that ascends even higher than he has. And Zarathustra, using parables, begin to teach the young man how to overcome his envy, because envy, he warns, will thwart him in his attempt to attain the overman. All right, the next speech is the preachers of death. Those who preach about eternal life preach that life is suffering, but that it must be endured in preparation for the afterlife. As such, they are preaching a renunciation of this life, and so are the preachers of death. The Existentialism paper says, on the preachers of death, those who preach of an eternal life beyond this life are ridiculed as preachers of death, and they desire for eternal life is exposed to weariness with this life and every source of nihilism. That same point is made in Nietzsche's commentary in The Twilight of the Idols on Socrates' last words. Great Saver says, Zarathustra begins speaking again, this time turning his anger towards those who preach death. He has two religious categories in mind: the Buddhist, who would say that life is refuted, and the servants of the Christian work ethic, who work all day keeping themselves busy so that they can flee to their innermost selves. Zarathustra admonishes both of these preachers of death, telling them to follow their own teachings and end their lives. Zarathustra mocks those who say sex is a sin, giving birth is a useless activity, and pity is needed. Zarathustra's teaching embraces life, every aspect of it, and not the death of the other religious teachings embrace.
Are you interested in the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence? Learn more at Advertise.com. Find more episodes on this topic. Sign up for the mailing list for bonus content. Get access to the show archive. And visit the storefront for tarot cards, merch, and books. Learn more at Advertise.com.
All right, Z-Dog's next speech on war and warriors. Those who pursue knowledge must do so relentlessly and with great discipline. Zarathustra likens this pursuit to war and claims that it is itself noble, having done far more for humanity than Christian virtues. The existential paper says, on war and warrior peoples, due to the metaphor of
Learn more at theabracast.com.
Whoa! All right, the existential paper says, on war and warrior peoples, due to its metaphor of warfare, a very troubling passage, but perhaps those who are repelled by its rhetoric have not noticed that the war Zarathustra speaks about takes place on the battlefield of knowledge, or knowledge. You're dropping the K. The philosopher is a warrior because he speaks knowledge, not contentment, rather than seeking the peace of an unquestioned life. And he accepts the challenge of questioning in the war of ideas. You know, I think that this is... I think I need to underline this. This is something, when I think about modern journalism, I think of this. The seeking the peace of an unquestioned life. When I see people who just, not even really journalism, people that just post factoids on like Facebook or whatever, like, this is my politics, bitch. Yes, queen. And they're like, they just post something from like NBC.fakenews.com, whatever, like red state, blue state, you know, like all these just irreputable like news sources. And they're just, or like even mainstream reporters, it's like, it's an unquestioned life. Like, they just bumble through with zero curiosity. They, you know, never asking the right follow-up questions. Like, I read shit all the time and I'm like, how come they're not asking this person this? Like, this is the wrong question to ask as a follow-up question. And I'm not saying that I'm like the best interviewer in the world. Ugh, why did I just sound like that? I sounded like a millennial. I'm not the best interviewer in the world. But yeah, this idea of living in the peace of an unquestioned life, that hits home with me. Grade saver. This speech, Zarathustra addresses that what is required of a discipline. Zarathustra tells his disciples that a person must fight to continue to grow and to ascend into a greater being. One must hold envy and hate in his heart, just as warriors do, against those who have already ascended higher. And Zarathustra loves his disciples, but he also teaches them how to engage in a war in order to become overmen. You must question the narrative, man. You must question the narrative. I'm not saying like 9/11 was an inside job. I questioned the narrative, biatch. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Like, I'm not pushing it quite that far. Oh, shot myself in the foot with that one, didn't I? On Zarathustra's next speech is on the new idol. The state has become the new... Man, this is so prophetic. When did he fucking write this? I should know that, right? I mean, I've spent hours reading this to you. I should program some hold music. Of course, it doesn't say. Maybe it'll say up front. I'm reading from my collection, so it doesn't say like all the way. Okay, hold on. All right, so Zarathustra, Thus Spake Zarathustra was written between 1883 and 1885. I can't just flip through and find when it was published, but he was appointed to the chair of classical philology at Basel University in, he's born in 1844. And he was appointed to the chair of classical philology when he was 24. So that would be 1868. So I can't imagine that he had to shop this thing around for too much. I mean, he had published a book in... he published in 1880, 1881... he wrote Zarathustra in 83 to 85. This thing. Okay, so I'm just going to read the last part of this thing. The last book he completed was Ecce Homo, which was an autobiography, and Nietzsche contra Wagner. He became insane in 1889 and remained in a condition of mental and physical paralysis until his death in 1900. So, okay, so this guy, you know, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, if it 1883 to 1885, it took him to write it. You know, it's a huge book, editing and whatnot. So what if it was published in 1887? And that'll give him room to write his last book. So say this thing was originally published in 1887. I mean, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is like the level of prophecy here is pretty amazing. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? He's saying the state has become the new idol, and the masses worship it and encourage uniformity and mediocrity, pandering to the masses. Freedom can only be found outside the confines of the state. Okay, so you have this like new left movement. The old left movement was all anti-establishment. It was anti-government. You know, it was like anti-war. But look at what the left has become. The fucking New York Times just called, what's the lady's name? She's running for president. Tulsi Gabbard. They said that Tulsi Gabbard had conservative views because she was anti-war. And now look at all these. I mean, just look at the state of the left. Literally the state of the left. Look at the state of the left. Trump's not my president. My president's different because I got a different president. They're all like super globalist, super statists. They're statists. Levin calls them statists. All right, the existentialism bit. I'm sorry for that wandering. Sometimes things hit my brain and I just have to kind of follow up on them. The existentialism paper says political critique on, and well, okay, so if he was writing this in 1883 to 1885, I mean, he's like looking at the barrel of World War I. All right, so let's see what are the similarities. 1 and 2 day. Okay. All right. Existentialism paper comments on the new idol, a political critique of the state on the coldest of cold monsters, which imposes the sameness upon all. The sameness upon all. Look, man, we're falling into this thing again. Like in the first speech that we talked about this evening. What did it say? All right, so listen to these two statements juxtaposed. On the new idol, the state has become the new idol that the masses worship. It encourages uniformity and mediocrity, pandering to the masses, and freedom can only be found outside the confines of the state. Now listen to this statement by the same organization, if not the same fucking writer, on enjoying the suffering and the passions, which was the first speech that we spoke about this evening. We learn and grow most from our moments of suffering and intense feeling, and they make us unique, and they should not be shared for fear of losing one's uniqueness. And someone who is driven by more than one intense passion will suffer inner conflict. No, back to this existentialism paper. No one is allowed to be a creator, and no one is allowed to be original. Think of unplatforming, demoting videos on YouTube. Think about, we've called it like the modern book burning movement. I'm sure there's another snappy word for it. Think about that. The difference is not tolerated in the state. The Daleks do not. Okay. Difference is not tolerated in the state. Difference is not tolerated by the Dalek. The state turns the people into the last human. Only where the state ends can the overman begin. Grade Saver on the new idol. In order to gain full control over the hearts and minds of his disciples, Zarathustra knows he must break the ideas and affiliations that his disciples held before they became his followers. The first conviction that Zarathustra must break is the dependence upon the new democratic state. The state is the new idol. Loyalty to the democratic state has overtaken belief in God. Holy shit. There's a chief idol of society. Zarathustra tells his disciples that people are true, noble creatures, not states. People serve life, he says, but a state only serves death by sending men to war and by lusting after 100 appetites. In this speech, Nietzsche levels a criticism against thinkers such as John Locke, who writes The Modern Commercial State. The state, Nietzsche writes, is generous to the people who bow down to worship it. Zarathustra insists that it ascends to the state of the overman. One must overcome loyalty to the state. One must be loyal to the individual instead. Holy shit. I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever said this before. I've never said this before. Nietzsche was a Republican. I had a listener who started reaching out to me probably maybe a year and a half ago. And he was interested in Thelema. And we would talk at length about how the New Age movement, this, which is essentially like a leftist movement through the hippies and all the pre-hippies and the hippies and all this, how they were able to kind of kidnap the occult and drag it left. The age of Aquarius and all of this stuff. And we would talk at length about it, and I could never figure out like a lane to attack it. I come close by calling magic. What did I call it? I was interviewing a dude, and I called it, this is what happens when you go off your notes, dude. I called it, it was like a practice of radical responsibility. And he was like, yeah, man, that sounds right. And you just bump that up against this leftist stuff. So just file this in your filing cabinet. We're going to see more of this. I've been on it for quite a while. I'm going to find a way to do it. Okay, so this is probably my my favorite of the speeches that we've covered lately. And this was the on the flies of the marketplace. Okay, so we're going to start back into it. Those who pander to the masses earn fame and popularity, but true change and influence and silent dictated by the overman and the creator. Such creativity demands isolation from the meddlesome crowds. The Existentialism paper says, on the flies of the marketplace, Zarathustra encourages the friend of the one who would be a creator to avoid the clamor of the marketplace and the rush for fame. It's important to note that this is the same marketplace that he dealt with the tightrope walker at the very beginning of our series, of the book. The very beginning of the book, he deals with this tightrope walker. But this is the same marketplace. It's called the town of Motley Cow or something, I think. These would only turn one into the last human. To be a creator, one must go into solitude. And here I am, my friends. Here's to you. Great saver. Zarathustra returns to the mark. Oh, here. She's saying it. I assume it's a she because it's like real teacher oriented. Like there's like an A+ with an apple at the top of the thing. It's like probably the weirdest featured article that I've ever got. The most like straight, the most white bread. Like white bread, not white bread. Come on. We've already talked about race. Oh, shot myself in the foot again. Returns to the marketplace and the place where he encountered the tightrope walker in the prologue. This time, he is speaking to his disciple after finishing his speech on the modern state, and Zarathustra turns his attention to the marketplace, a place where ideas are exchanged, and he begins to categorize the people of the market. And he tells the disciple that what counts in a place such as this is showmanship. He says that there are great men, those who can attract the crowd and passionately express their opinions and ideas. These powerful people are the best showmen, are the politicians and the intellectuals. But they know best how to attract a crowd and how to dominate the exchange of ideas. And Zarathustra calls those who serve these powerful people the flies of the market. But at the end of his teaching, Zarathustra shows the disciple that constantly being immersed in the marketplace is not a way to ascend. The exchange of ideas can only come to fruition from a person that retreats into solitude and let the ideas come to light. And solitude is more necessary than a noble in the market, than the necessary and noble than the market. And then we started a discussion on chastity. Chastity is good for some and bad for others. While it is counterproductive to pursue sex all day long, The effort of overlusty spirits that repress the sex drive might only corrupt their spirit further. The Existentialism paper says, on chastity, the contrast to the traditional teachers of virtue, Zarathustra does not teach that one must turn away from the body and the senses. Quote, do I counsel you to slay your senses? I counsel the innocence of the senses. Do I counsel you to chastity? Chastity is the virtue in some, but almost a vice in many, unquote. Grade Saver says. After encouraging his disciples to seek solitude, Zarathustra addresses chastity, a kind of solitude. You know, when you're on the wall, you can't take a wife, you can't sire a child, you can't own lands, you can't own a title. Here, Zarathustra begins to explain the teachings that he began in a previous section in the prologue. Zarathustra outlined his view that the body should experience pleasure and pain through itself. And here, Zarathustra shows that he is not advocating a hedonistic lifestyle in which a person can give into any desire. Zarathustra's true project is to have his followers channel their desires into a spiritual desire that will help them ascend to the state of the overman. For Zarathustra, not all are suited for chastity. For many, chastity only causes one to burn inside with lust and sensuality, desires that will eventually destroy a person. Chastity is desirable state, but Zarathustra echoes the Apostle Paul when he says that a person who is better to marry than to burn with lust. I have no thoughts on this because I am not qualified to talk on this subject. I'm John. This has been the Abercast. Thank you guys for your support. I know this is a fellow craft episode. Thank you guys for your support. Your growing number. You're swelling. I appreciate all the support. I really do. I really, really appreciate it. And now you guys have a good evening. I'm going to go make jambalaya. I'm going to finish this drink, and I'm going to fucking pass out.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books at Advertise.com.